Well, thanks to everyone for coming to our session this afternoon. We're going to be talking about data analytics. What are your visitors really telling you? Data analytics and what to do with this information. So I am joined by my esteemed colleagues, Kyle Jaebker, Director of IMA Lab, Jane Alexander, Chief Information Officer of the Cleveland Museum of Art, and I'm Alice Walker from Antenna International. And we've all been collecting data for a long time, long before it was a big conversation in conferences. And we thought we would start off by sharing with everyone a small anecdote of the way we've been collecting data in our lives. So I personally will start. I have been collecting data as a traveler since I started boarding planes, and was always the kind of person who would collect the cards and any kind of ephemera from a place that I visited, never with any plan of actually putting it in any kind of book or any kind of long-term scrapbook, let's say, but was always thinking about all of the ephemera and material I could collect to point to that trip. And then later, skip to today as a frequent traveler to various different client sites and locations. I find that I recently went to Berlin and London and stayed up the entire night on my plane playing the various different trivia games you can play against other passengers on the plane, and rapidly was engaging in the next trivia question just so I could see real time how I was doing against my other passengers. So good luck if you're on the flight home with me on Saturday. How about you, Jane?
I guess my one of the history, when I was like 7, my dad had box seats to the Mets and the Yankees, and I have 3 brothers, and I did not want to go. But there was always be a time where there'd be an empty seat, so box seats 4, so there was usually not a place for me. But when I came, I was really bored, so my dad had me used to hand do all the statistics for every batter when he went up, and you would mark in a certain way, and you learn. And then I got really excited about doing that. But then I became obsessed if I missed a batter and didn't know exactly what it was counted as, because they didn't have the big digital signage that shows you everything. And so then I'd be like, wait, what happened? And I would get all, so then I wasn't allowed to come to the baseball game or so. But I still collect data.
Hey, mine isn't as cool as collecting baseball stats. I used to do that too, actually, with my dad, so that's pretty cool. I didn't know you did that. We did it only for the World Series, though. So I do a lot of running and biking, and so I've grown a massive amount of analytics of places I've ran and run or biked over the years, which I haven't found a good way to go back and quantify that outside of just some general numbers, but it's always kind of fascinated me. And always, from that standpoint, as well as the data we collect in museums, think you can't really progress if you don't know where you've been. So those analytics, especially in running and things like that, if you want to get faster, you want to get better, you got to know what you're doing. So that's, what I do is collect way too much information probably about myself. And now with all the heart rate sensors and all that other stuff, it's even more. And if you want to get bored, I'll talk about it later more with you, because I love talking about it, so I'm going to stop.
So suffice it to say, we are all passionate about data, both in our personal lives and professionally. And what we thought we would do is discuss today's conversation in 3 sections, so about collecting, analyzing, and sharing. As part of this, we're each going to speak about our own institutions. We thought about roughly 15 minutes. We'll open the floor for a couple questions after each one of us speaks. We'll also be sharing some results from an industry survey, which we just started this past month, but many of you who are here contributed feedback to that, which is really appreciated. And then we'll open the floor for a larger Q&A and discussion. We also wanted to share with you some of the questions that are framing our approaches to data, and these include: what are your visitors actually telling you, and how should you respond to it? The title of today's session. What data helps institutions make better choices? How can we control our environments to gather accurate, useful data? And can visitor behavior data demonstrate engagement in content? I'm going to pass it over to Kyle.
Okay. All right. Do you want to start at that timer? Okay. I don't want to run over. Sometimes I get a little long-winded when I get going. So my name's Kyle Jaebker, as I said, from the Indianapolis Museum of Art, and we've been doing a lot of data collection, analytics-based stuff on all different kinds of things for a number of years now, even before I got there 5.5 years ago, starting back with Rob and Max Anderson when they were there in the Dashboard Initiative. And so that's kind of where I wanted to start with this and kind of talk about the history of what we've done, what we've collected over the years, and kind of some insights that we've gathered from all that information that we've gathered. As you can see, this is what our dashboard currently looks like. It's kind of whittled down over the years, and I'll talk a little bit about the reasons why that is. But we still do collect quite a bit of information, a lot more of it automated now than we did at the very beginning, where it was a lot of manual entry. But we, have this as a means to be transparent with our public, with our staff. One of the biggest users of our dashboard is actually the press in Indianapolis. They love it. So they always get kind of angry if we change things or move things around more so than anybody else. So be aware, if you put up a dashboard, the press will come calling. So it was definitely, an initiative that we wanted to put forward. And again, this was back when Max and Rob were really pushing the transparency part for the IMA and making it so that, this information was available not only to the staff, but to the public, to the visitors that were coming through our doors, to help, them see what we were doing, see what was going on in the institution, and allowing them to ask questions. Was a big part of it. If they're looking at this data and they don't understand it, well, we have people in the institution that are spending time analyzing it, the sharing part of it, getting it out there so that we know what to do with it, and conversely, giving that to the public and helping them understand it as well. So back in 2007 is when the Dashboard Initiative started. So that's 7 years ago, I guess, which seems forever in the grand scheme of things. There's 127 stats over those 7 years that we were collecting. Not all of those were throughout that whole time. Some of them lasted a month or two into the dashboard. Some of them lasted the whole 7 years and are still being updated today. Manually entered stuff, there's only 1,400 stats that were manually entered. And again, that kind of went, it takes a lot of time to go in there, or it takes a lot of ownership for people to go in there and want to enter that information. So as, positions change, as things change in the institution, those were the easy ones that kind of fell by the wayside. But automated stats, we have millions of records of data in our dashboard from automated systems, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. So some of the things we were collecting over the years, our endowment, what it was, that's probably one of our most popular stats that people look at, is how much money we have, go figure. Memberships, how many of those we have, and that's manual because we didn't have an integration with our management system, or membership management system, so somebody's hand coding that one in there, and that one still gets updated all the time. Donated produce. We have on our grounds, we have a garden and an orchard, and they donate a lot of the stuff that they grow there to a local food bank. And so they quantify that, and that was going up on the dashboard for a number of years. The automated things, we have a number of things. These are just a few, but temperature and humidity sensors in the galleries, to ensure that the paintings are under careful control. All of that data we're feeding back into the dashboard. Power consumption from our server rooms, visitor traffic using TRAFSs, so inflows and outflows of the building, and then web metrics from Google Analytics. We've got lots and lots of data there. So in collecting, like I said, there was a lot that we've kind of learned, and what are some best practices, I guess, and how you can get institutional buy-in to make these collections happen. Ownership is truly required, especially on the non-automated things. If it's automated, you can collect as much data as you want. It just does it by itself, right? But if you're requiring someone in their job to go in and enter a data point, whether it's once a month, once a week, that person needs to be vested in that statistic they're collecting and have a very clear reason as to why they're collecting it and how it's going to be useful to them. And it may not always be apparent to the person that's collecting it. It might be someone above them or someone laterally that really could use that information, but it fits in their bucket of information that they have access to. So, being very clear and upfront with those people and making sure that they understand the value in the data that you're collecting is very important. Again, automate as much as possible, because the more you automate, the easier it is to collect. It might be also one of the trickier things to do depending on what systems you're running. But it's usually possible to have some form of gathering a lot of information through automation. And like I said, know the reason for your collecting. If you don't have a good reason to collect it, are you going to ever analyze it? Probably not. So why are you collecting it in the first place? This one and the last one are kind of they fight against each other a little bit, because if you have the means to collect data, if you don't collect it and then you decide a year from now that you really want to collect or use that, well, you've lost a year's worth of data. Maybe that's not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. You could start collecting it, once you realize you need to use it. But if there's things in that automation category that you can just collect and it's not really going to cost you anything to do it, maybe go ahead and just start doing it and then figure out what you're going to do with it later. Okay, so now you've got all that information, whether it's hand entered, hand tallied in an Excel spreadsheet, whatever you're keeping it in. If it's automated, you've got lots and lots of stuff. The big data is thrown around a lot. I don't know many museums that have a lot of big data, honestly, in the grand scheme of what big data is. Some of you could probably argue that to me, but when we're talking about in the general big data science, we talk about Google or somebody that has petabytes or even numbers that I can't quantify in my head of rows of data. We're talking about really tiny chunks, but it still takes some knowledge in how you're going to analyze that. So I have a couple examples here that I wanted to talk about and some things that we've been looking at and analyzing to help us make decisions at the IMA, and they revolve around our website and some things that we've been doing in that realm. And so this graph here is showing visitors to our museum, our main museum website. And you can see the green line is mobile, the blue line is total visitors. So about the middle there is summertime at the IMA. We have 150 acres, and our museum sits on a very small part of that. So there's a lot of outside space. You can see that when a lot of people are outside and want to do things outside, mobile is spiking big time. So making sure that during those summer months, the things that we have going on in the institution are easily accessible on mobile has been a big push. And our website is fully responsive, so that kind of makes that part a little bit easier. But there are still some things, if we're doing special events or things like that, where we want to make sure that that content is accessible by those means, because people that are on the grounds walking around, they might have their phone with them, but not a desktop, right? So making that stuff accessible. So looking at this information, and even this, this is a ton of data points, but it's really consolidated into a graph that's easily accessible from Google Analytics. So using the tools that you have, where you're collecting the data to help you generate reports like this that give you actionable items are really important. This one is one that we actually generate on our own out of data from a couple different sources, and it's showing revenue from our website sales, and also what that means in terms of mobile revenue. You see that the gap in that first one is really extreme, but most months we don't do much in terms of sales on mobile. So why is that? Well, that could be a number of factors. People might just not like to buy stuff on mobile, but I think we see that people are buying stuff through Amazon online, and I know from, maybe it's anecdotal, but I've seen stats and some other things that people are, the trends in online shopping are moving to mobile or iPad-based devices, right? So it's probably not that people don't want to buy things on mobile. I think it's more so our checkout's probably a bit cumbersome on your phone. It's clunky at best, I would say. So what does that mean we need to do? Well, looking at this, our goal, as a museum, we want to bring people in, we want to sell tickets to our events, we want to make it easy for them to do that. How are we going to do that? And so now we're looking at redoing all of our online e-commerce. Using data like this to make that decision made that case a lot easier when we bring that to our senior management, because it's, if people are looking at the overall trend of people moving more and more mobile for just accessing our website, but those people aren't buying things on our website. So, it's one of those things that kind of makes that case a little bit easier when you're looking at, all right, we need to spend some time on this project because it's really not doing the job that it should be at our institution. So those are just a couple of things. It's taking that massive information, distilling it down to something that is actionable, things you can take to other constituents in your museum, and making sure that they can understand the data that you're presenting them. If you just dump a spreadsheet full of data on their desk, they're not going to be very inspired by what you're telling them. So you need to be able to have the talent or have the skills to look at that data and figure out what are the right points that you can make out of it to make an action. In doing this, I thought some questions that we like to ask ourselves when we're looking at our data is, who's going to benefit from this information we've got? It's usually some people across departments that can take information, especially in looking at things like the analytics from our website. That affects everybody in the museum, not just the technology department or visitor services. If we're selling things in tickets, that's the visitor services, it's technology for sure, but then it's also curatorial and the programs people that are putting things on and all those pieces, working together. So getting that information out to them all and not just siloing it into one department is really important. Who can interpret it? That is probably one of the bigger issues I think that we're going to be facing as we gather more and more data going forward. If you have large data sets, being able to consolidate that information to those actionable items is not the easiest thing in the world, and there are specialized skills that you can get to make that easier and learn how to do it. There's a lot of tools out there that can help you, but it is a set of skills that someone in your institution probably needs to have, and it's probably not one person. It needs to be people are looking at this data across institutionally and figuring out ways to distill it into those actionable items. And then lastly, what do we want to learn from this information? You can make data say a lot of different things. And so trying to be objective and looking at it, using it for what it is and not for what necessarily you maybe want is probably the wrong word even in my slide. But I think, you need to look at that data and have some conclusions you want to draw with it and not convert the data to meet those decisions or those conclusions you're looking for, but definitely know kind of upfront what you're looking for. Okay. Lastly, this data is great. Everybody loves to have data when they're making decisions, but what's the context of the data you're collecting? That chart I had up earlier, like I said, I could have looked at that and say, well, we're not doing much mobile sales. Well, man, it's probably because people just don't like to buy mobile. But there's a lot of other evidence out there, right, that kind of contradicts that. So what's the context in the data you're collecting? If it's, visitor traffic, is there weather patterns that are causing people to not go on the ground, so we see declines in visitor traffic for a week. There's a lot of different pieces you have to pull together to generate context. But don't forget about human intuition. Sometimes the data is not going to tell you the right answer. You might look at something and just know deep down that people aren't coming here because of X, Y, or Z, and it's more obvious just to actually look at the people and see and observe and use your human intuition to make that decision, as opposed to those analytics that aren't really always the right answer. And so the last part is sharing. Your data wants to be free. I always like to say, at the IMA we're, I guess, kind of notorious for putting things out there and just letting people have it, for whether it's software or data. And so I think this kind of data, these analytics, if you don't have the resources to analyze it, if it's out there and someone else decides they can do it, maybe they won't tell you what you want to hear, but is that a bad thing? If they're telling you, if they're looking at your information and giving you insightful things about it, that can help you even if it's not what you want to hear. So in sharing, like I said, it's not just about one department using that data, it's about sharing it across the institution, getting multiple staff people involved, helping others make decisions by providing with the information you might have, involving the public. If you have information analytics on maybe when are the grounds the least crowded, maybe that's a useful thing for people to see out there. I know if our museum's not crowded on Tuesday outside, well, maybe that's the time I want to go because I like to be in the galleries when no one's there, or I would like to go sit under this tree and not have a bunch of kids running around. maybe it doesn't seem like it would affect someone's decision, but, or, if they're going to involve themselves with your institution, but if you put it out there, you'll find out if they're going to use that information. And they're, building trust, using the information to improve, continuous improvement, and just enhance communication around your institution. So these are a couple of things that I thought were kind of neat applications and things. So our IMA dashboard is, we launched it in 2007. That code is still the same. So that's 7 years of code. It feels like 14, I guess, which is pretty old in the software scheme of things. So you could go use that if you want. It's still there. But some of these other tools that have popped up are like hosted online dashboard tools. So if you want to report data out to the public, Chart.io is a neat tool for analyzing data. So there's quite a few things here that I think are useful when you start getting into looking at this data and analyzing it and sharing it. All right. So what's next for us? Again, one of the things we're looking at collecting a lot more information on, or trying to, is how people are using our campus. Like I said, we have 150 acres. We know really well on the people coming in and out of our building, but outside of that, we don't really know how many people visit the acres of our campus because we're bordered by 2 streets. There's a canal that runs through the middle. It's a public access towpath, so people run and jog through it all the time, bike on it, walk down it, come onto our campus. There's a parking lot that's down at one end of the grassy 100-acre park that we don't have any way of knowing kind of how many people are using that year-round. So trying to figure out different ways that we can do that. We've started looking at using Wi-Fi. Apple's doing some things that make that not as possible anymore, or trying to. And then Bluetooth LE and doing stuff with beacons as a means of, if somebody has an app, using that to gather analytics about how they're moving throughout the campus, inside and outside. So that's something we're going to be continuing to look at, continually refining what kind of statistics we're collecting, and hopefully I put an updated and refreshed dashboard. I toyed with not putting this on here because we don't have a specific date yet, but we are in the process of thinking how we can redo our dashboard and redo that software and make it more general use so that other people can collect all kinds of stuff and use it as well. Right, so I think we said we were going to do a few questions, so if anybody wants to, or hold them to the end, we can do a few questions now. Yeah?
I have a quick question. You mentioned having a skill set to analyze data, and you said there's some resources out there. Could you name a couple?
The internet? I'm kidding. No, some of those things, like those software applications, do some of that. They, are helpful in like reporting and looking at data sets. When you get into large data sets that are more custom, there's a lot of research that's being done in that field. And so, yeah, when I say the internet, I'm not really completely joking actually on that, because there are a lot of people that are doing like university level research and how to analyze things. And there's a lot of software packages that are coming around that you can use to kind of, parse through data. But a lot of it still is kind of specific to the data set you're collecting. Google Analytics for your website is a great thing, right? Because it provides a bunch of out-of-the-box reports. You don't have to really it still is good to know how to interpret a lot of that information, right? But you don't have to do the distilling of it down into actionable, doing all the work to get it to those actionable items, because it helps you along the way. So like I said, some of those links I posted kind of are helping with that. And it's really one of those things that, it's just, I could probably dig up some things, but I don't have them off the top of my head. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely each department kind of has their own things that they're analyzing and looking at. The 2 charts I had here actually were done by our marketing department. They do a lot of analytics and social media type analytics, gathering and research and putting together reports to give us summaries on how things are working in the social media aspects of the world. We do a lot on the technology side, just from web analytics plus in-gallery interactive things that we've done. We'll do things like that and gathering a lot of that. Most of that we gather through Google Analytics still, and then do some reports that we report back to a larger digital team that is more cross-departmental. Our interpretation and evaluation team does a lot of this as well, and that covers surveys with the public, and then they report back. We do online surveys through SurveyMonkey, so there is a lot of that kind of more evaluation-based analytics gathering that we're doing as well on how the exhibitions are, how people are using the museum to get the text and the context to go along with some of the data metrics that we're collecting. Yeah.
What would you say the reaction is, or the appetite for things that are underperformed?
In terms of, like, if you see
how staff reacts to information that shows them that something is not performing as it should.
like membership levels or something like that. It's like, oh, that fell off this month. Yeah, I think it's overall, it's treated as one piece of the story. It's not, like I said, the data can't tell you everything about what's going on, and there could be very valid reasons why your membership dropped from one month to the next. And so, I think for the most part, I don't usually see people push back against data too much or get upset about what the data might be saying, but look at it from a perspective of, okay, we have this. What does it mean? How can we learn from it and move forward to make it better? If it's a negative connotation to it like that. Yeah, maybe last one.
How much of your data are you aggregating into some sort of a data warehouse versus how much are you keeping in sort of discrete data sets? And then one way or another, how much do different departments have access to all of the data versus certain chunks of it? Because I'm sure some of it is more sensitive than others.
It depends on, we actually, like the dashboard is probably, it's really our central kind of data store. And so we do pull a lot of like those automated statistics into there. Some of it we still pull real time out of the other systems as well. So we do consolidate some. I think one of the things and part of thinking about how we would rewrite this would be to do a lot more of that to make reporting across different data sets more easy. So right now it is a lot of pulling from different places, but we do aggregate quite a bit, especially on all the hand entered stuff goes into the dashboard right now, and that's the way we've kind of always managed that stuff. But the automated things, there are quite a few that are still in their own systems, and we just have built ways to pull that data out, or they might have their own reporting mechanisms that different departments use. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jane. I'm from the Cleveland Museum of Art, and the day I left, there was a huge blizzard, so this is not accurate. This is from July. This is not talk about Gallery 1, much to Kyle's dismay, but we just completed a $320 million renovation. One part of it was this interactive gallery, Gallery 1, that has 10 interactives, including this collection wall, and a museum-wide app that has wayfinding through every gallery. So 2 weeks after it opened, and it was a 2-year fast, we presented at a conference like this, and everyone, we were going through it, we were like, it's just that it got it all working, and the first 5 questions were, do you have data on how people are using it? Do you know how your visitors like it? It was like, it's been open 2 weeks, but we are dynamically pulling and collecting data. So, for example, in the lenses, we have multiple games on an interactive. So we're collecting which games you're playing. How long did you spend? How many times did you repeat the game? What objects, like if you're making the face game, did you match with? How many keep coming up? How many shares were there? And then we also throw it up in our actual museum. So we have a beacon when you walk in and the games people are playing, you can see, what people are doing live. We also, on the wall, you see something you like, you favored it, and it goes directly to your iPad, but it also gives a running total that there's 636 people who have favored that object today. We also have a method of top 10 and top 50 favorites. As people are favoriting, one of the 30 themes that come up, and we have a few dynamic themes, actually pulls the current top 10 favorite objects, or top 10, 50. When you create a tour after favoriting all your objects, the tour is then associated with one of the objects, so you can immediately then get into that visitor's tour if you're next to them. The other thing of our analytics, and we use Gallery 1 as sort of a test bed, is because these objects are large on the wall, when you see something like ink on silk and you can say, we immediately send that to our application team, and they can see, is this a data entry? Is this a roll-up problem? Is this an application problem? So we are very proud of our collection data because we have scrubbed it because it's out for everyone to see constantly. Now, we've had our online collection out for 5 years, and it's just at that amount, people don't look at it like they do when it's right in front of you. We also, data can show you bad algorithms. In this, the way the wall works, you touch an object, and you can then see, if you touch Dutch painting, 12 objects from the collection. As you go to another object, you can always choose between a date, a medium, and a gallery, and then dive deeper. So 6 months after we opened, and I'd be giving a tour, I would notice that some of our collections, like Dutch painting and contemporary, the same 12 objects were coming up, and we have 300 Dutch paintings. I also noticed when they showed the top 10 favorited objects that a sword was in the top 10. We have like 200 swords, and how did that sword get enough energy to get in the top 10? And someone was saying, well, it's in a movie, and I was like, okay. But then we went back and we started to look at the algorithm, and we realized that the developer had not randomized from our what's on view. They had decided, well, it's going to be a little boring at the beginning. Why don't we weight it? So as people favorite an object, it will come first into the randomization. But then, of course, as you do that, you now are going to favorite it more because it comes up more. And 6 months later, you're going to have, in the collections, everything look the same depending on the department. So we corrected that. It was also sad because all the stuff we've been collecting on the wall was obviously a little screwy, but that's how it works when you think. So the thing about Gallery 1 is that it really was a sample for the big picture. We now have a cross-collaborative, museum-wide digital strategy and a method for implementing it. Our application team we have a business side, our website, our application side, collection side, library side, and when there's a project, they look at the big picture. And we always look at the back-end systems. We look for how we're going to clean the data and keep it current, and we look at how people can use content in multiple systems. So our objectives of our strategy is activate the collection, connect art, promote scholarship, support the research of our institution, facilitate internal and external collaboration, drive attendance, increase revenue, and streamline work. So that's all of our in-house 32 systems, and the color-coded based on you're the collection side, the e-commerce side, the internal working side, the outward-facing webs, digital signage. Gallery 1 is, and it's how the ultimate picture is that it all connects to each other. So we have a couple of showcase projects, like our archival repository, and it's up there. And we look at the approach to how we want to, when we built this project, and then I'm just going to go through these fast, like our digital asset management system, that's down there. We look at how that connects to the rest of the system. And then when we do it, we look at this, and that one was the functionality. We are rolling out our CCMS in January, and it shows that it's next to the old system because those will be together for a while. And that system is about our cataloging, our libraries, our WorldCat, Collaborate, our website. It shows where all the external places, because our website and our intranet are connected, and where we look at that. And then we copied Indiana, and we said, we had an interim director, and he really wanted a dashboard. And he thought, oh, it'll be transparency. And we said, all right. I mean, it was kind of done 8 years ago. So we created one, but we did it differently in that we took it upon ourselves, because we're API crazy. What systems did we have that it could dynamically pull it without us doing any work? So what we have found is that, as Kyle said, reporters love the dashboard. And I know it because I will see something with some crazy number And I'll be like, where'd you get that? Oh, they got it from the dashboard. So we find out, oh, there's a problem with where it's pulling data. So, but that's when our big picture is nothing can be up there unless you can pull it from another system, that someone can't be maintaining it each month. Our bigger project is across the entire museum. We have our ticketing system, our parking system, our donor system, our store system, our ticketing system. And so we have created a central table because if you're an advancement, you want to know who's donated over $100,000, who attended the big event last week, who has donated artwork, who is using ArtLens. And if they had donated an object, is it on view? So you want to be able to pull those results and get that information to be able to make decisions. But then ticketing doesn't really care about the individual. They care about what type of people came to the event. Are they members? How much did they give last year? Do they go to multiple events? Are they part of our package season? Do they like to go to the films and just the music? And then we look at our store. When did people buy more things? Was there an event going on? Are they a member? Did they do it online? Did they do it through mobile? So this has become like this holy grail. And so we've been building this out to sort of, instead of have everybody get all the same information, we don't want to change your work process. So we work with your system. And instead, we create this table where you can pull information from all the other systems. And our big rule is no one-offs. When someone has some project in the past, there's all these, throughout the museum, people be working on something. You didn't even know that there was like another mobile app going on or something. It now has to be part of the whole big picture because we need to share content, we need to connect to each other, and also it has to be able to be worth, museum resources are limited. So if you don't have the investment with the whole museum knowing it, it's going to not be a big payoff. So then we also, this is Gallery 1, and at the very beginning, right near, and it looks sort of far away, but that lens is those sculpture where you stand 6 feet back and you pose, and there was a Richard Long, and we saw that, and a lot of us in the tech side said, people are going to fall into that? Is that going to work? And they have really wanted to put it out in Gallery 1. And so we we'll do some evaluation and testing. So instead of realizing before we open we should remove it, we decided this is what we were going to do. And so we did replace it because before the study got going, we had a study from security of people making complaints because they were falling and hurting themselves. So we used that as the study and said, we need to do that. So sometimes we get too crazy about, let's do a study here. And sometimes it's just like, let's look at this reasonably and think, is this really what we want to do? Because you have to close those space for 2 days to deinstall, something like that. The nice thing also is we had, when we opened up, we did an iPad app, but we also had a year to do our iPhone and Android. So we looked at the smartphone differently than the iPad, and we looked at some of this information we had gathered, and that people like taking photos, and they like sharing them. But at the end, people still really want to know something about art. They want to leave the museum with some little, something that meant something to them with the collection. And we also found that no matter what they were doing, it had to be kept simple. So we really went back to our interface so that it would be very easy to use. We also looked at some of our analytics. We found out that our scanning was one of the most popular functionalities. But initially when we started, the program was to scan all objects throughout the galleries. But I took it out of the program to only scan two-dimensional, because when you scan the two-dimensional, it pops up like less than 2 seconds. Sculpture, you can technically make work, but you have to hold it at the right place, at the right angle, and if you can't get it to work, it's frustrating. So my feeling is if it doesn't work easily, it's out of the program. So we went and looked at it again, and the technology was not there. So because we then looked at the people who were having problems with some of the artworks that we had to scan, realized that they were leaving. They were thinking that this functionality that was very popular, if your first two didn't work well, you're probably not going to use it throughout the museum. We looked at how people were sharing the artwork through ArtLens, and we looked and thought they're not really doing that at all, and we spent a lot of energy on that. People always expect that any object you come to, you can share. But we did notice that in this game, people love sharing that. Every director who came to Cleveland Museum of Art shared it. Every museum staff, old people, young people, people love doing this. So it was really an understanding of, okay, sharing's not going away, but the whole selfie part of the artwork thing was much more important to the experience for the people. The other thing we looked at was when we were doing our upgrades this year is how fast people were adopting. It was already changing in April, and then when iOS 8, it was unbelievable how fast people adopted. And iOS 8 and the combination of iPhone 6 and the new Galaxy, certain functionalities in ArtLens were not working. Like it was like when someone came to the desk, it'd be like, are you on System 7? Do you have an iPhone 4? Oh, is it a 5S? Do you have a System 8? Oh, the tours won't work. There was like, depending on the combination, something didn't work. So we have gone back and we are taking out some of the things that make things break. We're looking at the bigger picture there. And we also, throughout our whole museum, we changed we were doing hosted nodes to begin with. We are now iBeacons everywhere. Again, we went from 10 meters to 1 meter accuracy in every gallery. But the maps on ArtLens were based on the visitor map drawing, which did not match with the blueprints of the building. So when you change it to the technology gets that good, to the visitor, you were like 3 rooms off sometimes, because if you're especially in our rooms downstairs. So we had to redo the maps. So sometimes better technology, you have to really make sure. But we also are now able to really track where people are and what they're doing. And so again, we're gathering that. Gallery 1 2.0, that main area of Gallery 1 with the artwork is going to be refreshed for 2016. And we're looking at, what we didn't gather, what we want to know more of. And so really developing deeper analytics. We found, like even with ArtLens, we know that you start to listen to videos, that people say that they're going to save the videos for later. We know that people start the videos. We don't know if after 5 seconds they stop the videos. We know if they completely finish. Completely finish, there's like 5 seconds of blank space at the end of each of our videos. So even that, doesn't, these are really the people that go to the end. So, so it's hard with doing content because a part of you thinks people aren't, there's a whole team of people who think, I don't think people listen to videos that are more than a minute and a half. If it's a 2-minute video, are people listening? But we don't have the backup to really show that. So this was more, so with doing it, we're looking at the goals again. And we have an in-house evaluation research team that's doing a big study, and they're almost completely done with it. So they gave us, I said, can you give me some statistics? So they said 45% of the visitors use the lenses. This is like they watched people in this space a year and a half ago. And I thought, is that bad? Is that good? It's 45%. We did a lot of work. That doesn't sound like a lot. And so then I said, wait, in the galleries, how many people stop and look at a painting? How many people just walk? And they were like, oh, that's like 22%. So I was like, oh, this is a great number. But again, understanding, we get a lot of statistics, and then we don't know how to really look at them. So I used this one as an example. And this was also even showing, we know what people are playing, but we haven't analyzed it down to, do people play the third video more? Do people look at, is it because of what it says or where it's placed? And so what we have learned for this whole process is that we have put evaluation, we have an in-house team, and instead of halfway through the process saying, oh, how are we going to evaluate this, what this is, we put them at the table. They sit right there, and we look at a project, and we say, okay, what are the goals? How are we going to go forward with this? And then, right now we're doing an in-house geo-finding app for one of our exhibitions. And we've talked about, okay, we're going to have feedback, because the way the app's going to work is you're going to get it, and you can download it at home, and it will have the marketing information and when the exhibit. But the actual tour because of all the rights, won't download until you get on site. So we were talking about, well, what do we want to evaluate? Do we want to evaluate, how the app was, how easy it was to download? Are we evaluating the tour? It's like the first step to an audio guide being like in an app for us. But if we put it at the very end, some people might not go to the museum because they didn't like the interface at the beginning. That was the marketing interface. So even discussing, do we put feedback as soon as you get it? Or when you do the tour, does that annoying thing pop up and say, what did you think? Let us know. And so it even gets into how are we going to collect this so that we get the right type of visitors where we're at. So that's my probably plus 15 minutes. So. Does anyone want to ask any questions? Or? Sure.
I'm curious because the 45% of people that are coming to Cleveland Museum of Art are 40% that are going into the Gallery 1.
Gallery 1. So they walk, so that one was that in the space, how many people just looked at the art or walked through and didn't stop and interact with the lens, like really interact with the lens for more than like 10, really touched it and did something.
And the, I think Cleveland is a local audience,
yeah.
High percentage of local audience, and it's a challenge to get those to be repeat visitors. Do you know about repeat visitors and how many people are coming together?
Well, that's part of also, we do know that, it's really more anecdotally, but Gallery 1's a huge repeat visitor. People really do like coming back. They're bringing people. There's enough games and stuff that they can kind of go by, or things that they like, they figure out and want to do it again. So they are doing a lot of studies, and it's one of the things is how is our repeat visitorship changed to the rest of the museum? And how has it changed? Because when we opened up Gallery 1, we also opened up, so we do know that families increased, I think 29%. But we also opened up a new cafe, a huge atrium, and a store. So, how much do you have to really, you need a lot of energy and people, and if you don't have it's very hard, how do you gather that kind of information? But those are the questions that people always want to know. Anything else?
I have a question, kind of for both of you who look at dashboards or ways of making information self-serve. Do you find that high-level decision makers really go get their own answer, or do they still ask you to run a report and figure things out for them?
For us, the dashboard's it's out there for basic facts. It's so in-house. There's always. That's why actually we did the central table. There was always these very complicated reports that then when you sort of customize them, it's costly, and there's not enough qualified staff that can do them for all the different departments. So that's why we have decided that making a common dashboard for each department who runs the reports sort of within those areas has become a way that they can sort of be in charge of the data they want. Plus, it also prohibits, they can't see, development can't see how much a painting was insured for, collections can't see what donor, how much they could, it still helps keep certain things away from everyone that is highly sensitive. All right, thanks.
Great. So I'm Alice Walker. I work with Antenna International, and many of you may know us. We work with audio guides and multimedia apps, devices, and staffing at various sites. And so I'm not representing an institution, although I'm working with a number of institutions. And I work in digital media, which is really the content production for the Americas. So just a little info about us. We are, each year, more than 63 million people are enjoying some kind of antenna experience. And that's at 550 clients around the world, which is more than 1,200 cultural attractions. So a real disparate array from towers and bridges and parks to museums, art museums, science museums, all kinds of cultural attractions, both nonprofit and for-profit, and interesting collaborations in between. And we generate more than 600 hours of new content, which is also more than 500,000 downloads of applications every year. And all of that is just meaningful for today because we collect a lot of data. We're collecting it. We've been collecting it for a long time. We've been collecting it through our on-site staff. When people are turning in players, we have a regular communication where people are asking, how did you enjoy your tour, and immediately are recording that in comment boxes. When we're working at sites where the organization is staffing it themselves, and maybe we'll go through that kind of training. That's a regular process of visitor services, which I'm sure you all do every day. So, we do a lot of that kind of manual data capture and have for years. But we are becoming more sophisticated with the times. And so in addition to that real analog experience, we've been collecting data in more of a automated way. So through our audio guides, through our apps, and through our data chargers. Typically, it's institutional or site-specific kind of data that we're capturing. There might be core data points that we're looking for, but it's pretty specific to the site. And then along with the kind of data capture that I've just described, we're also doing user testing and focus groups, either at the beginning of a project, in the middle, or afterwards as we're analyzing our data, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Some of the collecting challenges that I don't think are just unique to us, but certainly when we are working with a lot of institutions globally, there are various different challenges that I wanted to share. So these all in and of themselves are small points, but they can kind of dramatically skew your data. So the player timestamp, for instance, for the date and time zone can be a real contributing factor in having dirty data. And when you're an institution and you're bringing in X number of new devices because you have a temporary exhibition and maybe those devices are coming from someplace else, it's really important that those align with your actual date and time zone. And that's a problem if there are 1,000 devices or 5,000 devices, but it's also a problem if there are 500. So those are some of the challenges that are really important to be attuned to. Wi-Fi connectivity has been a real barrier for institutions for a long time in being able to collect data, and that's changing. Even with Antenna in 2014, we have just begun to have data chargers that can allow you to collect data if you don't have Wi-Fi connectivity. Yes, you can collect manual data, but it's really important to be able to connect if you have a large visitorship and you want to be getting more real-time data through tools such as Wi-Fi connectivity. But what's really important, regardless of how you're getting it, is that you capture the data before it's overwritten. So if you have a lot of visitors using the same devices, there's only so much data that can be captured, and then it's going to be overwritten, and then it's permanently lost. And then one other small thing, but important, is make sure that the session start event is the same as the user start, because that can really dramatically skew your data as well. So as I mentioned, we've been collecting data for a really long time. But something that we grapple with, and what our clients are asking us to collaborate with them in, is really thinking about how can we analyze data in meaningful ways to really think about the content. So for years, you've been able to say, well, we've got a take-up rate for our audio guides or our devices. We can see that the interpretation is meaningful and more people are coming to our exhibits. But how can you really drill down and make meaningful conclusions about specific kinds of stops, who the narrator is, the kind of content? Should we be continuing to create content about our perm collection versus our temporary? Should we be narrating with more than one narrator, male and female? Should we be expanding our permanent collection to include Mandarin and Brazilian Portuguese? All of these really meaningful questions, and data can help us to think about that. And I just include this quote here from Andy Warhol, which many of you may know, but he said, in the future, department stores will be like museums, and museums will be like department stores. And I think today and age, and maybe it's just that we've gone through a budgeting cycle, so I have this so clearly in my head, but you're probably feeling my pain in this. Everyone is looking for ROI. So despite what department you're in an institution, despite really which institution you're working in, it's very important to be able to point to how your work is going to hit the bottom line. And I think that data can be useful in this way. You know, data can be useful, but you have to think about what's behind the data and the story behind that data. But I think a lot of institutions today are looking to the data that they're capturing from devices, whether it's from your website, whether it's from your multimedia tool, your app, et cetera, and thinking about how can they track user behavior and can they start to drive, different kind of behavior that could end up hitting your bottom line. So is that more people coming through your doors for your exhibition? Is that people purchasing through your shop? Is that any number of ways that you can demonstrate to your directors or leadership team, as they may be, that the work that you're doing is valuable and it's hitting the bottom line. Some of the issues to consider with collecting all of this data that I thought would be important to talk about, that we look at the beginning of any kind of project, is how many data points is statistically significant. So it really varies by the institution. With surveys and in the merchandise and consumer products industry, oftentimes 1,000 surveys is statistically significant. So we try to say, let's at least make sure that we're working with a data set of at least 1,000 visitors, but we can work with much larger data sets, and we try to do that kind of thing. What time period is sufficient for analysis and then action? So you want to make sure that it's not too limited, that you're not getting skewed data based on seasonality or something that could affect the reason why you're receiving a specific result. And then all hypotheses are dangerous. So I think what I mean by that is it's really important to balance qualitative and quantitative analysis. How should we test our theses? So we at Antenna are really constantly talking about, we might have a conclusion, but we really need to think about how can you A/B test, how can you use focus groups, how can you really make sure that your conclusions are valid, and you can do that through testing. And then finally, how to balance numbers with politics. And I think we can all think to examples in our own industries where or institutions where we've seen that data can be a really polarizing element in making decisions about our institutions and our spends. So, it might be that one of the clients I can think about today has it's primarily narrated by, let's call it, their director, and that director has a specific agenda. And maybe he doesn't emote as much as some of the other interviewee subjects. Well, it might happen that those were the stops which were least listened to or dropped off more frequently. There's a lot of story behind that, though, and so it's not as easy to say, well, we're just going to re-narrate that. On the other hand, having that kind of data helps to take out an emotional element of a conversation where, armed with that and with enough of the story behind it, one might be able to go to the director and say, you know what, these haven't been as successful, and let's think about why. Is there another way that we can approach this kind of content? There are lots of examples of how, numbers can be political, and I don't mean to call out directors here, because there are all kinds of reasons why, content can be more popular. So similarly, we have started a dashboard with many of our clients, and this is just a screenshot from one of the dashboards from an institution. It's from a tower in the Americas, and this is just one example of the kinds of things that we're collecting. So it's things like number of stops per visitor per language, number of tours per visitor per language, a lot of sort of specific detail about use of a specific stop. But we can drill down further to things like number of canceled stops, canceled versus completed, further detailed kind of activities such as the preferences between quizzes or games, and different kinds of posts, whether people are using social media, Twitter or Facebook, and by language. So when you start to compare that over a period of time, you can start to make some pretty interesting conclusions, and then what you need to do is really start to think about how can the conclusions that I'm making be tested. This is an example of another kind of client where maybe we are not looking to pull as much data within our dashboard, but they have a temp tour and a perm tour. And so we're looking at some fairly basic data sets, but it's pretty interesting to be able to compare the number of visitors per tour per language within the temp collection versus within the perm collection. And the most versus least listened to stops, and then really have a dialogue with them about what is important about, you know, the stops that people are potentially listening to longer. Where do we think that we can move our interpretation strategy to be able to capture that kind of attention? So when testing, we think that these are definitely best practices. You want to make sure that you've got time on the ground for qualitative research. You want to draw conclusions by comparing your qualitative research and your data analytics. You should propose changes to the experience itself so you can test your hypotheses. So those can be all kinds of things. You know, if I'm comparing data on 3 different quizzes, and one of those quizzes is about popular culture and another is about the environment, and the popular culture one has greater hits. It might be for a number of reasons, but that environmental data might be really important to the exhibition to be imparted. So maybe there's a different way of delivering that data in relationship to other content, in another type of device. Maybe it's not through a quiz, but it's a different kind of game. Thinking about all kinds of things from the UI to the design to, this, as I mentioned before, like speaker and tone, et cetera. All of those things can have an influence. And so it's really important to have that iterative approach to test, take a select number of devices. You can't test everything. So maybe you're taking 100 devices or 500 devices for a specific amount of time and you're circulating them through, and then you are going through that wash cycle again of collect, analyzing, and share. I wanted to similarly share a couple of the links that we're using. I both work with Antenna, but I'm also working with a new R&D think tank within Antenna called Antenna Lab. And Antenna Lab is looking to really partner with organizations, either who we're working with or as part of the broader community, to be involved in dialogues and to be involved in furthering issues of relevance for our industry. So in a great spirit of really collaborating and more open source embracing of projects and things like that. We use Splunk for our dashboard and analytics, but we've also played with BERT Analytics. And I just include the URL in case you're interested later. So I've kept it short and sweet, but happy to answer any questions. And if not, what we would love to share is some details about our industry survey. So I'm going to pass it back to Kyle.
Okay, so what would be a talk on analytics without creating some new analytics, right? So we sent this out via social media, I guess, and maybe some emails, some other avenues that we could. Just thinking through some questions about museums and who's using analytics, what they're collecting, and try to get as many responses as we can. And so this is something we hope to kind of continue, actually, and not just have this be, we did it for today and now we're done figuring out what people are doing. Because I think it's an interesting thing for us to look at across the sector and see, you know, what are people doing? How are we going to continue this conversation going forward? So it was, I don't know, about a month, I guess, maybe not quite. And we had a little over 30 respondents from different countries, not just US, which is great. And there's just a list of some. So 84% of the respondents said they were tracking data in some form, which is good. And how long have they been doing this? So almost 60% were up at over 5 years and collecting some sort of analytics. And then it just kind of tails off from that. But it looks like, you know, the trend is positive, that people are starting to collect more and more. We do this again in a few years, and most people will be in the 5+ year range. So that's really great to see that people are actually out there collecting stuff. So then we asked, you know, what kind of stuff people were collecting. Visitor demographics was was the highest, I believe, yeah, pretty close with website analytics there, 90+%. So those are two ones that I think are just pretty classic, I guess, analytics in terms of knowing who's how many people are coming in your building or into your institution, and plus using your website. Website's probably the easiest one to actually implement these days. User behavior, so that could be surveys, point of sale information, membership data. So most of these people are collecting this, a lot of similar things. We had some others, I think, that were pretty low, but it seemed to be these were the big ones that people were looking at these days. And so we were curious, who is actually looking at the data that they're collecting? This is actually, I think, probably the most important question we were asking in here. And they said, most institutions said 77% of their staff or have someone on staff that can do some analyzing of that data. And that actually 32% have a specific position that's their job, which I thought was really high. I was surprised by that, and I didn't think we'd see that. And most people, it's part of their role as another, as just part of their day-to-day work, and they're not specifically looking at data and analytics. And these items on the left here, those are the different areas that they said, are looking at the data analytics and actually doing that analyzing. So kind of runs the gamut, like we said, and I think all of us kind of said, it's not just one person typically, it is a cross-section, and who's using that data and who needs to analyze it and use it for their job. It covers the whole museum and a lot of different parts of it. Yeah, so who's using it? Again, all departments was, I think, the top one. So, everybody wants to use data in some form to help them make decisions, is what the survey was saying. Visitor services was very high too, and how we're interacting with the people that are coming to our institutions, and then it kind of goes down from there. How are they using it? Marketing. Yay, we all market. That's great. Get more people in the building. Developing new exhibits, program planning. So a lot of the things, we're using these to develop the things that are helping us interact with the people that are coming through our doors, right? It's helping inform those decisions and helping create better experiences for our visitors. And we got a couple quotes here, I guess. We asked some people if they let us share. Some people are saying, no one's doing really deep analysis, but they're doing some kind of light, looking, which I think is probably the case for a lot of institutions. I know even there's some, we've been collecting this for so long and looking at a lot of data. Some things you kind of can just glean off simple things. Sometimes you have so much data, you have to really dive in deeper to get at those data points. Using visitors' data to address the needs of our constituents, we need to support the core activities of the museum. So, some really nice responses from people here. And actually, was I supposed to hand this off to you? I forgot. No, okay. All right. And so then we asked, if you could give some advice to other institutions on analytics. And so these are kind of some of the, I'll go through the yellow parts because there's a lot of text on here, but designing data structures that can power your analytics is important. Have the stuff that Jane's doing with their core data structure to allow that kind of amazing analytics analysis is really cool, stuff like that. Design data that makes sensible data output legible or meaningful. So don't just collect anything, I guess, and have no idea what you're going to do with it. Kind of collect it with a purpose. We've learned more in a 2-hour session user testing with a small number of people in person than we have from months of website analytics. Again, talking to people sometimes is the best data you can gather, and not relying on your computers to tell you what the meaning of some statistic is. Ask for a zip code instead of city or state for more accurate geocoding. Yeah, sure, that's great. We do that all the time too. Create an audience data network in the organization. So looking at the whole visitor experience as one data point, and how can you use that to interpret your experiences that you're providing. And how can we invite the audience to be a part of that conversation? The people that are coming to our institution. That's a lot of people weren't really sure, I think, on how to answer this, but these are the ones that we thought were kind of interesting. Balance of lobbying against user focus to be reached. I'm actually not really sure what that means, but it sounded kind of neat. Being transparent about how we collect the data and how we are going to use it. That one I think hits home to me, and in terms of what we do on our dashboard, and I think some of the other ones too, is it is a transparency thing. Getting that information out there allows people to, see what you're really doing in your institution. And sometimes they can interpret that wrong. So sometimes you have to tell them why it's meaningful too, even for the public. All right, so that was our survey, a quick run through. And like I said, we're kind of hoping that maybe we're going to leave the survey. Actually, we probably should have put a link on there. But check any of our Twitter profiles. It's in there somewhere. And we'll retweet it again too, if anybody wants to fill it out that hasn't in this session. And then hopefully one of us or all of us will look at the data again and put some reports out there on how people are using data in their institutions.
Absolutely.
So we've got, I think, like 5-10 more minutes if anybody has any more questions too. Yeah.
I was wondering, this is particularly true for Gallery 1 where you're trying so many new things. And I was just curious if you have any practice or you're planning on making public any of the data or any of the analysis. Oh, this is what people do when presented with this in the gallery space. Just to the, I don't know, the design community, the other institutions that are looking at projects.
Yeah, there's been a evaluation study going on for over 18 months, and they did through watching people sometimes had the app, some people didn't have the app, used Gallery 1, and they're doing a big study. The thing is, we also added things while they were doing the study. So the difference between having your own phone or renting an iPad is a whole different thing, so what you're looking at. So they are sharing that, and I know when it's complete, there will be a big announcement because everybody, as I said, from the minute we opened, they wanted to know visitor results on it. And I do think there are things, I actually also believe we should have just let it be open for 6 months and we can collect data, but as you know, it can be bad data. We also test it. It's so funny when we were certain objects, we all know the problem objects. We were trying to figure out why they weren't working, and the most hit objects or the things we scanned the most. Because we know we did them 200 times. So do you do you start from scratch, or you just keep going and you can sort of analyze? Well, we know why that was done. So yeah, we'll definitely share that.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So also on Gallery 1, how are you able to pull in data from Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, other social media that people are using to share their photos from Gallery?
So yeah, that's like a great question. When we first rolled it out, when you shared an art object, first we can tell from the backup, but when you shared something, it said, I found this at the Cleveland Museum of Art or something. And we didn't have a built-in hashtag or anything just to easily follow things that you could easily kind of get information like that. So we have not gone, so we just changed the wording for that. We have not gone back and looked at that very carefully as much as other things that were really more interesting capturing. We know people share things. We know it's expected to be there, but how much real estate on your app do you want to, have it there? It needs to be in a way they can find it, but maybe it's not the most important thing what we're doing with the app. We found that people like taking pictures, they like looking at a detail, so we've been really more focused on how do we get people to look at a detail so that they really remember what they're experiencing.
So are people taking a photo and they do the face of themselves on it? Are you able to sort of look at that kind of interaction?
No, they can send that to themselves, and then they can Facebook it or tweet it or do anything they want. So we know those numbers, how many people are sharing it.
That's at least what I was going to ask. You were saying earlier that the Facebook sharing is popular too. I thought it might be what the make a face share is. Is that because it's by email instead of by social media?
No, and in fact, the interface for the lenses, if you've been there, we made a conscious decision at the beginning not to have you have a login. We just wanted people to use stuff easily. So to send it to yourself, you have to type your email address on the screen. And in phase 2, we are going to have our interactors are going to connect easily with because more and more people, we realize now where we didn't, 4 years ago, everyone was going to always have a device with them, was not as expected as now. So we're going to have it that all the interactors connects with you. There'll be more immersive experience. But the thing about it's just that people want to be involved with the art. So it's not because it's art, it's that people like showing themselves participating in it is what, I don't think that's a surprise to anyone, but it was a surprise how few people really wanted to just share a piece of art they found, because it had, just 2 years before that, online, that was very important to be able to share an object, so.
I add to that, we have an app that we had in one of our exhibitions not too long ago that you could take a selfie and it would try and turn it into a pointillism portrait, like with the dots and everything. And then we had Facebook sharing in it and also emailing. I think we ended up seeing that it was like 3% of people did the Facebook sharing. And it took so much work to make that actually work, to allow people to log in with their account, which I think is why, well, we know that's why most people wouldn't do it, because we did some interviews. I don't want to log in on a public device with my Facebook account. Even though we log you right out after you're done, people just, it's a little, privacy concerns and that kind of stuff. People wouldn't do it, but they'd happily type their email in. And so they get it, and then they'd share it. And in the email, we always put text like, share it with this hashtag or something, and it'll, we'll aggregate these somewhere, stuff like that. So we did get a lot of people emailing, but the Facebook, anything that you're renting out to someone, and you guys might know more about this too with your intended devices, but allowing people to log in on devices that we're handing them, we've never seen good success with that.
Yeah.
People want to be using their own device when they are posting to social media. But I think even then, we've seen that, people want to be doing the activities that they want to do already. So as Kyle kind of pointed out, they're not, or maybe this was Jane was pointing this out, that, they're not going to be sharing with Instagram the things that you necessarily think they're going to be sharing. They want to share about themselves. They want to be taking selfies. They don't want to be posting about your pictures unless they're in it. They're the star of the show. And so you need to realize if you're asking them to engage in a social media activity in your space, that it has to be according to their rules.
Any more questions?
And it's a big investment in including that kind of element within your application. So that's another example where it's important to test before maybe you go full throttle with incorporating every kind of social media activity you could imagine, because it might not be what they want.
Do you have numbers that compare the difference between people that are, so you've developed apps that people are sharing on their own, they're on their own device, they download the app, versus, I don't know if it's changed since I was there, but you got an iPad at the door, you walk outside.
Yeah, well, from the very beginning, you could download it onto your own iPad. Right. But but
even when it's on their own device, is the sharing business?
Yeah, because it's not as, it's just not. I think they favored it a lot. They'll make a tour, but sharing it. Now, we did add sharing a tour. We found schools and teachers like to be able to put something together that everybody can look at together. But that's sort of, at first we thought, is it the design, is it the UI, is it the UX? But it really is about people are being part of the experience. But again, you can't there's so many factors in Gallery 1 that it's really hard to make without more information and without, understanding where we're going. We bought 70 iPads when we opened because we thought many people won't want to use their own device. And even though it's available now on Android, the iPhone, that no one wants to rent a device. There's this, that if they do, they very few people do it. We found people really just are comfortable with what they have, whatever device it is. So being able to be on all devices was more important to our visitor.
And I would say that trend is something we see at sites globally too. It's more important to be cross-platform and have devices for people who maybe are visiting and don't want to pay for Wi-Fi or the download speeds, et cetera, if they're coming from abroad. People who have all different kinds of access needs may want to have a device and might not have a device, and that's access, really defined broadly. But that it's more important to, even though there are smaller numbers of people who are necessarily bringing in their own devices and maybe downloading the app, in the beginning you'll see that it's going to continue to just grow. That's clear. We thought, just because from our survey we saw that so many people are collecting today, that maybe within the audience, any of you might like to share any suggestions that you have on either successful means of capturing data in your own institution, any like aha moments that you've had.
Yeah, for sure. We realized we were spending a ton of hours developing and supporting Internet Explorer 9. And it was really awesome to look and go, oh, 3% of our users? Why am I spending 20% of my time supporting this? So.
Right. That's great. Thank you for sharing.
We had the opposite. We looked at the numbers when we were going to a new website and what browsers we were going to support, and we decided everything below 10. There were a lot of people still using 8 that we would move on because they could, or below 9, and of course, you know, there was the 3% that went on and did not want to upgrade to Internet Explorer 9, and so it was, we had to go back and do a little, I mean, it's now, we've taken it off, but we kind of made a decision quickly saying, oh, this is easy, only 3% or whatever the number was, but it ended up being a lot of our patrons who they were not going to be upgrading. And even if we walked them through it, they did not want to.
I think we discovered at one point that 3% were all of our executive levels.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I also work on antenna, but so I see this global nature of things. You know, having offices all around the world, there's just this expectation that I feel like a lot of people have that there's some like global right about the way to you know, design anything within your digital realm, within your institution. And it's really interesting that how regional things really are. You know, how country-specific behavior is and how language-specific behavior is. So, I mean, I think that the way that we're really intending to use data is to be able to provide some of that information for our clients so they can understand the regional trends. But ultimately, what it's shown us thus far is that, you know, there isn't a one platform solution across the world, and that people can't take just the same path based upon what the latest and the greatest is, because that's not necessarily going to align with your visitation.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
I work at MCN now, but I recently transitioned from MoMA, where I work on the team that developed the MoMA Plus gallery app. And we had the benefit of actually having, prior to the development of the new app, an existing app that we tracking data on for downloads on for a few years. And one thing that we found is originally we were going to first roll out the iOS, do some testing, and then do an Android version. But when we looked at the actual statistics of the number of people who were actually downloading and using the Android, we did kind of a cost-benefit analysis where we found that, you know, at no time did the Android downloads actually exceed 15%. And so we looked at the amount of resources and cost and decided to actually just keep the iOS version and Android using a mobile optimized website. So that was a big you know, a use of data to make a huge financial decision.
Great, thank you. Yes.
Just to underline the point about regional differences, we just recently launched a site with the British Library and the Qatar National Library, which is a Gulf history archive, which they were widely publicised on its launch. And as we were just watching the live dashboard, the swing between mobile and desktop, it would go at the different times of day as the British, the US, and the Gulf audience, which were roughly equal by the end of the day. But the swing, when it went to the Gulf and mobile went up to, we were 95% mobile.
Wow.
And it was just every time you dived in, say what's going on here, it was country specific. And it was just extraordinary to watch that.
Well, that's great. Okay. Anybody else? These have been really great. Thanks for sharing, everybody.